Welcome, everyone. This is John, your humble host here with a quick warning. This episode of Trek Profiles contains mentions of emotional abuse, PTSD, addiction, and suicidal ideations. The content may not be right for everyone, so make the choice that's best for you. A full breakdown of what we discussed here on the show is up on the show notes page up at trekprofiles.com if you'd like to review all of that ahead of time. Okay, on with the show.
Watching Nog go, you know what? I'm just going to live in the holodeck and not deal with my I can see myself, if I had a holodeck, the risk of doing the same thing.
Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 81, recorded July 2023. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan, we hear their fandom story, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 81. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Here is your spoiler warning. We may talk about any Star Trek episode at any time, including episodes that were released after this show was recorded. You have been warned, Human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the jamming and jovial, joyful yet jealous, and jokingly jejune M5 Multitronic Unit. Say hi, M5.
M5 ready.
Let's do the announcements.
The M5 obeys.
This is an independent Star Trek podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is just to follow us wherever you get your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. At the end of this episode, my guest faces my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they must give us their answers. After each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls where you can have your say. Let's look at the questions then from episode 79 with Stephanie Girk and see how it went. I'm not feeling well. What are you going to prescribe? Lexarin, synaptazine, or trianoline? Steph said trianoline, and it was also the winner in the poll with 42%. Lexarin got 33%, and synaptazine 25%. Best piece of Star Trek medical tech, the neurocortical monitor, the biocomputer, or the psycho tricorder. Steph picked the biocomputer, but the neurocortical monitor was the choice online by 45%. The biocomputer got 41%, and the psycho tricorder 14%. The best-looking sickbay, the refit 1701, the NX-01, the Voyager, or the 1701D. Stephanie was all in on the Voyager, and so it was the online poll at 37%. The NX-01 was in second place at 24%, with the refit 1701 at 21%, and the 1701D in last place at 18%. Why is inaprovaline the best medicine? Tastes great, less filling, or low carb? Steph said low carb, but tastes great was the answer picked online with 44%. Low carb was second at 34%, and less filling was in last place at 22%. What's going to be on the final exam at Starfleet Medical Academy? A pre-ganglionic fiber or a post-ganglionic nerve? My guess was all for the post-ganglionic nerve, but the pre-ganglionic fiber was the choice online by a whopping 67% to 33%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. And in fact, some of the Kobayashi Maru questions that you'll hear later on in this very episode were written by listener Adam Saunders. We thank Adam for his contributions to the show. Okay, I got a little bit of errata for you. In this episode, I gave the wrong number for Deep Space Nine in the Pale Moonlight. I was looking at the correct number, which I had in my notes, but for some reason a different word came out of my mouth. I have no idea why. I regret the error. All right, that's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, start the show.
Acknowledged. Commencing transmission.
Her favorite aliens are the Cardassians. Her favorite captain only goes one way, and that's the Janeway. She is from the coast that is central in the California sector, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Vean Chevalier. Welcome, Vean. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Vean, are you a Star Trek fan?
I have to confess that I am, yes.
What's your earliest Star Trek memory?
Watching The Next Generation, when it first came on the air, I was sitting on the floor watching this little TV in my parents' bedroom right in front of their water bed, probably a foot from the TV.
Oh my goodness. Do you remember what episode it was?
No, because I was 3 years old.
Oh.
I remember watching it every week, but I could not tell you what episode got me to start.
So what is the earliest episode you remember?
It has to be probably the Robin Hood episode for sure, because I loved that one. I was pretty little.
Okay. So you started watching TNG. Now, I assume this was original broadcast, or was it, afterwards?
No, it was the original broadcast.
And did you watch it straight through?
I did.
And then what happened?
And then Deep Space Nine came out, and I was a little bit older, and I said, "Oh, I don't like this show." And I stopped watching Star Trek until Voyager came out, and I was hooked. I was hooked right from Caretaker. So.
And you started watching all of that straight through as well. So did you give up on Deep Space Nine, or did you watch Voyager straight through?
I watched Voyager straight through. Yeah, I watched the first couple episodes of Deep Space Nine when it aired. And, going from Next Gen to Deep Space Nine, I was like, yeah, no, I don't like this. I don't like what they're doing. I thought the acting was bad. And I was just like, nope, not watching this. And then, 2 years later, but I heard about, wow, they're going to have a woman captain, and sat down and watched Caretaker. And I said, this is great. I love this. I love what they're doing. And I love the story. And I never missed an episode of Voyager. I used to actually record them on VHS and rewatch them over and over and over and over.
Just between you and me, was the clock blinking 12 on the VHS? On the VCR?
No, I always made sure mine was set.
All right. See, that's a test question, right? I mean, it's there's only two kinds of people that had VCRs, right? The people that adjusted the clock and the people who did not. So very important to know. Okay. So you'd seen TNG at least starting at some point and then watching it straight through, and then you've seen Voyager, and then did you continue right on into Enterprise after that?
I hated Enterprise. I was an angry teenage girl, and it started with the introduction of Seven of Nine and the cat suit and the hypersexuality, even though the character herself wasn't hypersexual. As a teenage girl in the 90s, it was hard to, like, how do I want to phrase this? I mean, I knew what they were doing. They were catering to the male gaze. I knew that as a teenager, and it pissed me off. And then we went into Enterprise, and here's Paul in this ridiculous outfit, and I really couldn't get past that at the time. And I know it was the first sort of prequel, and I've never been a big fan of that formula. So I just didn't like Enterprise. I actually still don't like Enterprise. I like Porthos the Beagle, and I like Dr. Phlox, and that's about it. So I didn't watch Star Trek anymore for a long time until Netflix came along. Then I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm a Trekkie, I forgot. And I rewatched a lot of Star Trek really quickly, and I'm still rewatching all the time. So there you are.
So have you gone back and caught up on all the parts of Enterprise and Deep Space Nine and all that stuff that you missed?
Oh, Deep Space Nine for sure. I actually tried to watch Deep Space Nine. I had a friend, it was her favorite, and this was back when it was airing. And I tried to rewatch it after it went off the air a couple of times, and I just never got into it. And then I was dating this person that it was their favorite series, and they were rewatching it. And I was just, again, I would be walking through the room and I would hear some spectacularly bad acting and roll my eyes. And one day we had a snow day, I was in Virginia at the time. And snow days were really uncommon, so it just shut everything down. And he was watching the episode Waltz. And, I was home, so I just sat down and watched it. And I was like, holy this is like watching live theater. This is incredible. And it got me hooked. So I ended up watching, I think, seasons 5, 6, and 7 without watching the first 4. And so I loved it because that's when it really gets interesting. And then I went back and watched the whole series. And now Deep Space Nine is right up there with Voyager as my favorite. So
that's great. So you're still missing some Enterprise then?
Yeah, I've watched very little Enterprise.
Okay. And then the Kelvin movies come out. Did you watch those?
I didn't see the first one in theater. I had heard it was really good, but I hadn't seen it. I think I finally saw it a couple years after the fact when it was out on DVD. And I mean, it was fine. It felt more like an action movie to me than real, Star Trekky. And I saw Into Darkness in theaters, and it's fine. It's not for me. I actually liked Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan, though. I know that's an unpopular opinion, and yeah, I still haven't seen Beyond. They're just not my cup of tea. But what I like about them is that they brought a lot of new people into the fandom, and they sort of rejuvenated it and made Star Trek popular again. And I think without those, we would not have this resurgence that we're seeing now.
I think there's a good number of people out there who would tell you that Beyond is probably the best of the three.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I got about 5 or 10 minutes in, and I was just like, and turned it off. So I do need to give it another shot.
And so now we have the streaming shows. And so how did that work for you? Did you run out and immediately subscribe and consume each one as it came out, or what are you doing?
Well, no. I was watching Discovery because I was really excited for Discovery. Despite the fact that, again, we were going back in time, which I would like to see what happens after Voyager with some new characters. And I got about 3 episodes in, and I was just like, nope, don't like it. And so that's all I've seen of Discovery. Now, I have heard it gets better, but I didn't like the way they were handling certain things. I was frustrated that, they had been saying, oh, we're going to have another woman captain. We're going to do and they killed Giorgio off almost immediately. And then we had Lorca. And I thought there was some really terrible writing. And I get frustrated. And this is my problem with a lot of the new shows. I get frustrated when they rely heavily on a built-in audience and the nostalgia factor rather than taking risks and making something new. It seems to me, especially Picard, that they want to do gritty, dark, more Game of Thrones style storytelling. And if that's the case, just make a new sci-fi show, but they want to lean into the built-in audience to mitigate risk. And so here we have this new character, Michael Berman. Oh, but she's related to Spock. And so we can bring in these nostalgia legacy characters. So people go, oh, I love this because Spock, remember Spock? And, they're doing Strange New Worlds, which is, again, all, these characters we already know. And they're doing Picard, which is, again, bringing in all these characters we know. And the only one that I feel, for me, has really worked, surprisingly, is Lower Decks, which I was completely prepared to hate. And of the new shows, it's the only one I really like. I think that they're doing fun, exciting storytelling, but they're keeping it for the most part light, which is needed. But they're balancing it out with actually some pretty, not heavy, but some pretty deep storytelling, which is what Star Trek always kind of did. And this is a show where I feel it's appropriate to make those cameos and those Easter eggs and those nostalgia factors, and it works to their advantage. Whereas the other shows, it just feels like, hey, we want to tell these stories, but no studio's going to produce something new because they're scared they'll lose money. So we're just going to use this stuff, and here you go.
What percentage do you think you're at with each of the shows?
I have not watched any Strange New Worlds. I've watched the first season of Picard, and I hated it. And I watched the first couple episodes of Discovery. I have seen all of Lower Decks. I haven't seen any of the shorts either.
Prodigy?
Oh, right. Prodigy. I forgot Prodigy. No, I haven't seen Prodigy.
The one thing I'll say about the Picard show, like it or not, is that the best way to approach it, in my opinion, is essentially 3 mini-series which are unrelated to each other. The 3 seasons are very different, and they just don't seem to have a cohesive whole. And even their internal logic within the season sometimes can be a little challenging. But I think it's season 1 of Picard basically tells you nothing about season 2, and season 2 tells you nothing about season 1 or 3. And the same thing is true for season 3. They're all just wildly different from each other. Not to say, so I think it's very difficult to say anything about Picard in general, like I like it or I didn't like it, or it was a good show or a bad show, because in my opinion, it's 3 different shows. It's really the only way to think about it, because they had so many changes that were going on. I think the same thing can be said too about Discovery in a lot of ways. And this is not a criticism. It's just that they've had so many changes behind the scenes early on in the show. I think that it really affected how the show came up on screen, like the stories they wanted to tell, the sort of the direction they were going with things. And there was a lot of behind the scenes chaos that I don't think had any other option but to end up affecting the quality of what we got in a lot of ways. But I don't know, there'll be a tell-all book in 15, 20 years that'll probably give us all the deets on that. I don't know if you want to say anything on that or not.
Yeah, I just don't think we know enough to really say.
So in your journey of Star Trek fandom, did you ever decide to collect anything? Comic books, uniforms, anything like that? Trinkets?
When I was a kid, I collected the Voyager magazine.
Nice.
Yeah, there was this really awful comic book shop, and they were the only ones that had it. And there was one of those shops where they would like follow you around because they thought you were going to steal. And it was just awful. But I would go in there every week and get or not every week, I think it was monthly, but and get the new Voyager magazine. And I had every single one. And I had a bunch of the books, and I had this really awesome book called Captain's Logs. Mm-hmm. And it was this huge, thick book that it was like chronology of basically everything that had come out to that point. And I had some of the figures and stuff. But you know what I did is when I was 20 something and not, I hadn't watched Star Trek in a while and this and that, and I gave them all away. I gave all of my Star Trek stuff away. And now I'm like, why did I do that? So I have nothing from when I was a kid. And especially because I had that entire magazine series. I mean, from number 1 on. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm kind of annoyed I didn't keep that.
It's funny that you mentioned Captain Logs, because as we recorded this, myself and my friend Kara, I think you might have seen her around the Twitter. Mm-hmm. We're doing these online watch parties called the Observation Deck, where we watch random episodes of Star Trek over a Zoom call. And we did one a couple weekends ago. And as part of that, I gave away prizes. So we played some Star Trek games, and there were prizes people could win. And one of the prizes was a loot box from my personal collection of stuff that didn't speak to me, that I just didn't feel the need to keep. And one of those things was an edition of Captain's Logs. So someone actually got awarded that. I gave it away just very recently. And I think funny. I think there's an unboxing video of that. I think I can't remember now, but anyway, that was funny. So yeah, I just gave that one away. I actually really enjoy giving that stuff away. I went at STLV last year. One of the vendors had these random boxes of stuff. Like it was all sealed up in a box, and you'd pay $20 or something, and you'd open you didn't know what was in it till you opened it. And I kind of enjoyed that. I bought a couple of those, and there was a few things I kept, but most of that stuff I was like, this is neat, but it's not for me. So I'm giving all that stuff away.
Right. Fun.
When did you first hear of something called a Star Trek or sci-fi convention? Which one was the very first one you went to, and how was it for you?
Well, there's 2 answers to that. And I heard of conventions when I was a kid, and there was one that was going to be for a weekend at an Air and Space Museum, probably about 20, 30 minutes from where I lived. And I begged and begged, to go to that. I was too little, I was probably 10. So it's not like I could take myself. And I begged my mom and her boyfriend at the time to take me, and promised she would. And then we had her boyfriend's bratty, awful children that weekend. And of course, they always came first. So they did take me Sunday afternoon, probably around 4:00, when it was wrapping up and everybody was gone. So that's a memory. And then I didn't go to my first real convention after that until 2015. I went to STLV, and it was incredible.
What was the highlight of that experience for you?
Of STLV?
Yeah.
Well, my very first one, and I think this is common for people, is that it's always about doing the panels and seeing the guests and stuff. And then as years go by and you meet more fans, it's definitely more about being with the community and being with friends. But that very first one, I went to see two people. I went to see Robert Picardo and I went to see Andy Robinson. And kind of a funny story, and for those that don't know, so they usually let you in like preview night, if you have certain tickets. And so, being my first one, I went in and they're still kind of setting up the vendor's room and I'm walking around and not expecting to, see anybody. So I hadn't mentally prepared myself. Yeah, you know where this is going. So I'm walking around the vendor's room and there's Robert Picardo sitting at his table, on preview night. And I just was, okay, I'm going to go talk to him. So I like get my dander up and I go over to Robert Picardo and I'm like, start off cool. And I'm like, oh, Mr. Picardo, I'm here to see you. And I'm just so excited. And then the fangirl just took over and my brain short circuited. And I just started talking faster and higher pitched and just, you're so wonderful. And I just love you so much. And you're so wonderful, and I just totally queened out on him. Like, I mean, it was bad. And he just sat there and like leaned back in his chair and took it. and once I finally stop and like take a breath, he's like, hi, what's your name? And I'm like, oh, I'm Vean. He's like, oh, Vean, it's lovely to meet you. And then like kind of like go away. So and I walked away and I'm like, I cannot believe I just did that. And then I'm like, well, it's okay because he meets 5 million people.
Yeah.
And he won't remember. And I go, and I don't see him for a year. And I see him the next year. And he's like, oh, Vean, it's lovely to see you again. And I'm like, he remembered, so. So that was it. And that, I think, though, in that one instance, I got all my fangirl crazy out. And so I've always been totally chill meeting anybody else. So.
It's funny. I had a similar experience. I think I'm a little different in that the actors and people on screen have never really like just done it for me in that way. But when I meet like the people who wrote an episode or like someone who did something behind the camera that I know about that really impressed me or amazed me, those are the people that I freak out about. And one year, and I'd have to look to double check what year it was, Ronald D. Moore just walked in to the convention without being part of anything. Like I think he just bought a ticket actually. And he just walked in and sat down at an empty table in the vendor's room and just was like, anybody want to talk to me or like take a photo or something? Nice. And that was it. And there was like an instant line of people. And there was no handler. It was nothing. He just literally showed up and just sat down. I mean, it was crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I nearly lost my mind. Anyway, we are not here to talk about me. We are here to talk about you, Vean. So let's continue on then. So have you continued being a regular convention goer?
Yes, actually, I went, I go to Vegas every year except this year. And I've been on the cruise multiple times. And I actually ended up working for one of the talent for a number of years. So I've done actually probably at this point more behind the scenes stuff than I have as a regular attendee. And I also was a writer for StarTrek.com for a while, and I had a blog. So I've done some interviews, and it's kind of interesting to see things from the other side. So I have a sort of a dynamic perspective on the whole experience.
What do you think is the biggest difference working behind the scenes in Star Trek?
You see people the way they really are versus what is presented to the public.
Okay, so tell us how that came to be. How did you, just being a fan and just going to conventions and doing that stuff, how did you end up working for one of the talent? Please, just lay that story out for me.
Well, once you go to these things enough times, I mean, people do remember you. To a certain extent, especially if you're very interactive with them and have unique stories. And I was a writer for StarTrek.com, so I knew some people that way. And then as a blogger, I had interviewed some of the actors. So, they really knew me. And I sat down with this one member of talent one day, and I was talking to them about this experience I had, and we just really hit it off. We had a lot in common, and we ended up exchanging numbers, and we became very, very good friends. And one day were like, hey, can you help me with this? And I said, oh, sure. And then one thing led to another, and ended up getting hired on for a number of years. So, it was all very organic.
Okay, so you're going to conventions, you're working for some of the talent, you're having a great time doing all of that stuff. And then at any point, did you ever decide to put on a Star Trek cosplay?
That's something I always wanted to do, but I'm such a perfectionist. Like, if I do it, I want it to be screen ready. I am not talented enough for that, so I've never done it. And every year I said I started to get the stuff to do 7 of 9 once, and then I never did. And I always said I wanted to do a Seska cosplay, and I never did that either. And it's part of it is being, a perfectionist, but part of it is also my friends that I go with.
Mm-hmm.
They're so amazing cosplayers. I would just look ridiculous with them. In fact, 2 of my friends, I call them my ducklings. I've been friends with them since they were teenagers. I was like, oh, they need an adult. So I took them under my wing. They actually won first place at the STLV cosplay contest in 21, I think it was. So
was this the Cardassian punk?
Yeah, those are my kids. The Andorian punk.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, those are my girls, and I say I raised them, and I love them dearly. But they are incredibly talented, and it was so cool to watch them grow as artists because they make molds of their own face, and then make their own prosthetics and their own costume. They sew everything themselves, and they draw all the designs themselves, and they do all their own makeup and their prosthetics. And to watch them, I met them online when they were 16, 17, and then I started meeting them in person when they were 18 and old enough to go to the conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And to watch them grow from, their little crappy prosthetics to as good as they got so fast. It was just, I just so impressive, and I love them dearly.
So let me just offer a thought, which is that no one can do any cosplay for a convention that is screen ready, because even the actors are never screen ready, right? I mean, there's people who are touching them up like every 5 minutes. It's impossible. But there's an area of cosplay which is usually pretty good, which is people doing sort of these low key cosplays. Mm-hmm. I've run into people doing like the eyeglasses from the game, or dressing up like the transparent aluminum guy from Star Trek 4. I mean, stuff like that. So that's super easy stuff you can do that, you may not feel the pressure. So if you ever feel the urge, think about stuff like that.
Well, I did have one of my friends once draw with, makeup, just like, what do you call it? Eyeliner and silver eyeshadow. She drew 7 of 9's ocular implant on my face, and I walked around with that.
Nice.
So that's about as close as I've done.
Okay, well, I think it's about time to talk about some episodes. Are you game?
I'm game.
All right, let's talk about In the Pale Moonlight, Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 13. Of course, the episode named after a line from the Joker in the original Batman movie from 1989. I think it's 1989. I don't know, I have to look that up later. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
It is.
So, very, very good. Well, then I can't believe I remembered that. So you will have to tell me why this episode is especially meaningful for you. Lots of people bring it up on the show. We all know it's a great episode of Star Trek, but tell me about why it matters for you, Vean.
Well, I really relate to Garrick. I feel I have a lot in common with him, and he is a character that really, I know a lot of people love him because he's a fun character, but he really resonates with me as somebody who is in an environment where they're an outsider, and sometimes they're kind of brought into the fold, but oftentimes they're on the outskirts of what's going on, and not really accepted, but used when necessary. And I feel like I'm in that position a lot. And in particular, this episode, the interaction between Sisko and Garrick, I feel a lot like my interactions between my brother and sister and myself, because they are very upstanding. The dynamic we've had in my family, because I'm the youngest,
mm-hmm.
and my family, I came from a very, very abusive background, and I was always the one who handled things. I'm using air quotes right now. And my brother and sister were always very by the books. And so when Cisco and Garrick are having conversations, I feel like conversations between my siblings and myself. And how I was always the kind of I had to take the role of the bad guy in so many situations.
So you identified with that particular role because you were facing some challenges in your personal life and it spoke to you.
Yeah, exactly.
When you look back on the episode as an older person, does it still have that same resonance, or has your thoughts about it changed?
Oh no, absolutely. If anything, it resonates even more, especially because I have these sort of violent, intrusive thoughts that I would never act on, but I understand Garrick in that way because so many people, especially in the Tumblr culture, which is a different social media platform and one that I'm actually more active on. So many people, because of Andy Robinson's portrayal of Garrick as somebody who's on the queer spectrum, there's so many people who woobify him, to use the slang, and oh, he's a sweet cinnamon roll who never did anything wrong, and oh, his poor father abused him, and he's just a sweet gay man, and he was forced to be evil and do these horrible things. And then you see an episode like In the Pale Moonlight, and I'm like, did we watch the same show? Because between In the Pale Moonlight and Empok Nor, you're seeing a character who enjoys murder, um, who enjoys violence, and who has no problem, no hesitation using certain things to achieve their goals. I mean, Garrick is somebody for whom the ends always justify the means. And that is another thing that I relate to that's maybe not a great trait about myself, but I do understand it and I do feel it. So, yeah.
To be honest, I feel like the ends justify the means is like a Cardassian standard thing. It doesn't seem like it's particular to Garrick.
No, that could be why I love the Cardassians so much. I'm sure it's one of the reasons.
Okay, very fair, very fair. Okay, let's talk about a Voyager episode. Let's talk about Blink of an Eye, Voyager Season 6, Episode 12. This, God, of course, is the one... Episode. Yeah, it's where Voyager is in the orbit of a planet where the planet is progressing at an incredibly advanced rate, and sort of they turn Voyager into basically some sort of sky god. And we have the wonderful Gotena Retz, and we have all the stuff with the EMH being stuck on the planet. So tell me here, what is going on in this episode for you?
It's just such a great episode, and it's nothing that speaks to me personally. It's just storytelling at its best, and it's doing the things Star Trek has done many times with cultures that haven't achieved warp drive yet, and how they perceive advanced technology. And that is a recurring theme through all of the series, but I think this is the episode that absolutely handled it the best. I think it's a fascinating story. I mean, I would never in a million years, I don't think, have thought have a planet that's displaced in time that way. And like I said, it's nothing that speaks to me personally. I think it's just an absolutely amazing episode. I think it's beautifully written. I think that it gives so many of the characters a chance to shine. And I think the special effects are very, very well done. And the acting is great. And so I can't really remark on it as a personal story. I just think it's brilliant from start to finish.
Yeah, it is certainly one of the, very sort of sci-fi concept episodes that I think is just glorious. I love everything about it, to be honest. The EMH stuff is a little strange, like with his son. I still haven't quite figured out how that happened.
I was actually going to bring that up. That's the one thing I'm like, wait, what?
It's just kind of a mystery that they leave out there, and that's all to it. But I think, Daniel Day Kim was a wonderful guest star. Just everything about the whole
so brilliant.
Episode.
He was brilliant.
Yeah, he's been great in everything, to be honest. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything where I was disappointed in his performance. Even if I didn't like the show, he was great in it, whatever it happened to be.
Absolutely.
I also have on the list Waltz. You've already talked about it. Did you want to say anything else about it? And this, of course, is Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 11, where we get Dukat and Cisco basically go on a hike.
Yeah, well, what I loved about that episode, and I've mentioned this before, is that it feels like watching live theater. It feels like you're sitting there watching two performers in real time on the stage. And just you have these two powerhouse actors just going at full. And it's incredible. And one of the things I loved that I don't think a lot of people noticed, or maybe they did and they just haven't said, is that Ducat's hallucinations of Wayoon and Damar and Kira behave differently than real life Wayoon, Damar, and Kira. And so I don't know if it was written that way, but it's almost like these are his perceptions of how these people should interact with him. And one of my favorite things is actually part of Casey Biggs' performance is Damar in that episode when he is talking, the hallucination Damar is talking to Ducat, his body language, he actually kind of lowers himself, he hunches over, and it's very obvious that Ducat believes that this person really admires him and is submissive to him, and the body language is so beautifully reflective of that.
It's an issue that's been discussed in a lot of science fiction before. I know I've brought this up on the show before, so I'll just mention it very briefly. As we record this, an episode dropped on another podcast where I'm talking to my friend Andrew Heaton about one of my favorite sci-fi novels of all time, a book called Solaris. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you ever had a chance to read it.
I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Yeah, there's also some movies that came out about it, but the movies are not they're not about the same things as the book. They share sort of a similar premise, but they're different. But one of the ideas in the book is that these scientists are getting visited by people from their past that are being created by this alien entity. And one of the key insights in the book is that these simulacrums of these people from the past are not the people from the past. They're their recollections of those people from the past. And in 100% of the cases, the people who are meeting their visitors are repulsed and horrified by them. And it's because they're missing that serendipity that you get in a real human interaction. Mm-hmm. And even with people that you intimately know, they still say and do things that surprise you from time to time. And when that's missing, and this person is exactly as they are from your memory, that turns out to be a very inadequate form of the other person. And it was just a very deep human insight. And I love it when it comes up in sci-fi, and I love it here as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll have to read that. That sounds fascinating.
Oh, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. So anyway, I'll put a link up to that on the show notes page up on trekprofiles.com if people are interested. By the way, I don't know if you ever read the background information on this, but that was actually supposed to be the whole episode was inside sort of Ducat's fantasy memories in his interactions with these other characters. And turned out they just didn't like how the story was going, so they put a lot more Cisco in it. But there's a lot of interesting backstory up on that at Memory Alpha if people are interested. Okay, keeping with Deep Space Nine, let's talk about Ties of Blood and Water. Deep Space Nine, Season 5, Episode 19. This, of course, is one where we have Gamor, who comes back to the station, who claims that Kira is not his actual, but sort of his spiritual daughter, I guess might be the right term. I don't know. I'd have to think more about that. I just came up with that in the moment. Please forgive me. It's probably not the best word. But I'm curious for you, Vean, what about this episode speaks to you?
I have had complicated issues with my own parents. Not to get too deep, but my parents were both drug addicts and alcoholics, and they had their own demons. My father has passed away. He died during COVID, and I loved him dearly. I do love him dearly, but we had a complicated relationship because of his substance abuse issues, and he was just like a pathological liar, and he broke a lot of promises over my lifetime. And we would go through patches where we would not speak at all. And fortunately, we were speaking, before he died. But so we had a complicated relationship, and my relationship with my mother is equally complicated. My mother was very emotionally, verbally abusive, especially when she was drinking and using whatever drugs. And so I have a lot of issues around stuff like body image as a result of that. And It's a little better now. She's sober. I just want to put that out there, but there's still these ghosts of things that never go away. And so you see an episode like Ties of Blood and Water, and I think this is one of the few episodes where Nana Visitor really shines, because I think she has a tendency to overact. And I think this is one where she really nailed it, especially in her final speech where she's talking to Julian and kind of crying through, but this guilt about not being there for her father because she couldn't handle it. And then so she did miss out on his death, and trying to reconcile that with to Kenny Gamore, who was part of this fascist machine that really harmed her people to an incomprehensible degree, but seeing the individual rather than the whole machine, right? And so trying to reconcile all these things, and she's struggling, and I get that struggle. Knowing the things my dad went through that made him an addict, that made him, but knowing the good things in him too, and that he was a hard worker, and he protected his siblings from his own parents, and he took on the brunt of it, protected them. And I'm kind of that way too. And so watching Kira trying to balance all of this and not completely lose it, and can she forgive to Kenny Gamore in time before she has a repeat of what happened with her biological father? And I think it's just a really powerful episode.
It's Only a Paper Moon, Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 10, in which we visit Las Vegas in 1962 in Quark's holosuites, where Nog decides to set up shop, and not only that, he decides to live. So tell me what's going on with this particular one for you.
Well, first I have to just say, shout out to Aaron Eisenberg. We lost him too soon. He was one I would call a friend. He and his lovely wife Melissa. And when I heard Aaron died, I just sat on my bedroom floor and cried, because he was a friend, and he was a wonderful, wonderful human being, genuinely wonderful human being, kind and funny and loving of everybody, and so caring, and just such an incredible person. And we miss him every day. And his performance in that episode is show-stopping. I mean, just absolutely outstanding. And he just gave it his all, and he knocked it out of the park. But and you may have guessed this from what I was just talking about, have post-traumatic stress disorder. I have actually CPTSD, which is, complex over years of abuse. So I don't have PTSD in the way that Nog had it in a war injury, which is often how it's talked about in media. But I do have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I understand his desire to hide in the fantasy, to escapism, to a degree that's probably unhealthy. And in fact, it is unhealthy, and that's what that episode addresses.
Yeah.
And so we have this thing in psychology called maladaptive daydreaming. And I think I have a tendency to lean into that. And it's hard to face the real world when you have these kinds of traumas. And so watching Nog go, you know what, I'm just going to live in the holodeck and not deal with my I can see myself, if I had a holodeck, the risk of doing the same thing, because here's an easy out. And I don't want to look at these things too deeply. I just want to be in Las Vegas and work in this casino and work with this singer, and not go back and deal with the reality of war and deal with the reality of my injury. And to me, it'd be like, yeah, I'm just going to go live in Middle Earth, and I'm going to live in Rivendell and read books, and I'm not gonna deal with my trauma. I'm just gonna live there with the elves. So I totally get that. And then for him, the bravery to go, okay, no, I do have to deal with this. And here are the people I can lean on. Now, in his case, it was his family. And in my case, it's to a large extent the friends I have made that have become like family in the Star Trek community. So, it really speaks to me on that level.
I got to admit, personally, we follow each other on Twitter and stuff like that. And I got to admit, sometimes you scare me a little bit, Vean. I mean, you put some stuff up there sometimes that makes me worried for you.
Oh no.
And I try to reach out when I see that stuff. I mean, well, if you go back, like in our DMs, I mean, I think there was one like last week, and I always worry about you, So when you put episodes like this, I see stuff like that, and I hope you're always okay, and I hope you have the right people to lean on in your life.
Well, I'm fighting the good fight, I'm still standing. I wouldn't be were it not for somebody I met through the Star Trek community, because as you know, I think I committed suicide a little over a year ago, and I would be dead right now if this person hadn't called the cops over and over and over and over and over until they busted into my bedroom and dragged me out. And I was on life support in the emergency room for 2.5 days. And I truly would be dead now were it not for this person that I met through fandom. So, it's more important than people realize. Community is.
I'm glad that the community was able to help you in that way, and I'm glad that you got the assistance that you needed in that moment of emergency.
Yeah, and I'm stable now, for the most part. So I'm sorry if I say things that scare people sometime. I probably should be more careful about that. It's part of my process, but I should take that into consideration.
No, it's not that. It's not that at all. If you're feeling bad, if you're having a bad day, it's okay to share those things. I feel like, just as someone who just knows you through social media, I always feel like there's something more I should do, but I never know what that thing is.
Yeah, I feel that.
Let's talk about Latent Image, Voyager Season 5, Episode 11. This, of course, is the one with Ensign Ani, where she's mysteriously disappeared from the crew. There's some records that they find. The Doctor is having a really hard time and is suffering some sort of weird situation where things are not quite lining up. And it turns out, of course, that that they had deleted some memories of a difficult medical situation that was causing him some confusion in his programming. So tell me, what about this episode is going on for you?
Okay. So at the risk of getting a little dark, I have some mental health issues. I have, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I have severe depression, and I get on what I call the negative feedback loop, where I have these thoughts and they just cycle around and then back to the beginning and cycle around and back to the beginning and cycle. And so when the Doctor is kind of going through that, when there's this scene in the mess hall where he's talking, and he just starts losing it, and he's got the two fruits and they're alike. And then which one do you choose? And then he throws one and then he goes, and then he gets another one. And he's like, he's going and he's just, why did I kill her? Why did I choose to kill her? And I can see he's on what I call the negative feedback loop. And I feel that in my soul. And by the end of the episode, there isn't an easy answer. They tried the easy answer prior to the episode, right? So that's what we find out is that they just said, okay, we're just going to delete this so he doesn't have to deal with it. And obviously that didn't work, because even though he's a piece of technology, that's not how we work. And that's the point of the episode. And so I love that at the end of the episode, there's not a quick fix. There's not a boop, boop, we did this and now he's better. And he is just having to learn to deal with it and how to get by day to day with these memories and with these thoughts. And that's such an important thing for people like me to see, is that, look, there's not going to be here you take a pill and you're better now. You have to learn to handle your and I love that about that episode. I love the passion that Robert Picardo gives to that performance. He really, really gives it his all. And I love that Janeway, at the end, she's acknowledged that, she was wrong to try and make the quick fix, and she's sitting with him. And she said, even though they're not talking, she's there. It's like, hey, I'm here. I see you. And it's important to feel seen. And I love that. I love that about that episode.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because as we record this, the last episode I released actually has a real version of this, which occurred in the episode. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that.
I haven't, not yet.
My guest was a nurse, and she's a bedside hospital nurse. And during COVID, she tells the story that they had one ICU bed available, and they had two patients who needed it, and their situations were equally dire. And the doctor is like, "Well, everything on the charts looks pretty much the same. You know, you're around them more. Which one do you think should get the bed?" She's like, "I'm 2 years out of nursing school. I have no idea." You know?
Yeah,
But
I mean, how do you choose in that kind of situation? There's just not a good choice. This is a lose-lose. We have win-win situations. This is a lose-lose situation. And that's, how do you deal with something like that?
yeah, it's certainly something which is very profound. And it's one of the reasons I like the episode. I like it when Star Trek asks the hard questions and doesn't always give us the easy answer. I always like that more than when they just sort of tell us, like, you know, obviously answer A, because when you get those kinds of episodes, it's like really obvious. It feels to me that they always set it up in a way that like the easy answer is the right answer in a lot of ways.
There's an episode that really does that beautifully in Voyager. It's called Nothing Human.
Mm-hmm.
That's the episode where B'Elanna has the parasite sort of attached to her, the alien, and they have to use the information from the Cardassian doctor, and it gets into this whole issue of this, like, you know, Josef Mengele kind of situation. Like, is it okay to use this information that was gained unethically to save a life? And again, it's like they don't say what the right answer is. Is there a right answer? I mean, you know, how far back do we go? Because so much information dating back to so far in human history was gained unethically. And so if we cast aside, how far back do we cut off? You know, it's kind of it's a fascinating episode. Another one where they really, and I think that's something about Voyager did better than the other shows, is a lot of the episodes did not have a concrete, this is the right answer. And I think that Nothing Human was one of the best for that.
Oh, I haven't seen that one in a long time. I'm going to go back and check that one out.
Oh, it's great. And it has Cardassian.
So it's obviously a favorite for you.
Krell Moset, yeah.
All right, very good. So, Vean, it's interesting. You spend a lot of time online talking about Star Trek in various social media places. You've been watching it since you were a girl. You even worked for a while behind the scenes in Star Trek, working with some of the talent. So obviously Star Trek's been a big part of your life. Why is it important to you?
Well, I love seeing this post-scarcity future because look at, I mean, the times we're living in. I mean, just even in the 80s and 90s when I was really watching these shows in real time, and it's worse now, is that, you know, there's so much greed and there's so much hatred and there's so much division. And to see the possibility that humanity could live in a post-scarcity society where nobody is homeless, nobody has to worry about getting treatment if they're sick, nobody has to worry about starving, and that, you know, it's basically paradise. And there is not this division and hatred because of these minor differences that don't matter. And to see that humanity could come together and be part of a community that's even larger by going out and exploring the universe, I think that message of hope is very important, especially in the times we're living in, because if we take those ideals and we live them, we can get there, but we have to all do it. And I hope that we can, but the pessimist in me says we won't, but I hope that we can.
Well, Vean, I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 is signaling me that it's now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Ruh-roh.
The Kobayashi Maru is the Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive it, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready to face the Kobayashi Maru?
I'm going to kill it.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guest responses.
Simulation ready.
We're stealing a starship. Which one are we taking, the Rutledge or the Phoenix?
Rutledge.
Who are we going horseback riding with, Kirk, Picard, or Pike?
Picard.
Which pet are we pet sitting, Dr. Phlox's Pytherian bat, Miles O'Brien's Lycosian tarantula, or Livingston the fish?
The bat.
Who are you joining on a crossover away mission? Kim and Paris on Deep Space Nine, Cisco and Dax on the Enterprise, or Tendi and Rutherford on Deep Space Nine?
Tendi and Rutherford.
A terrible virus is deleting all holoprograms in existence. We have only time to spare one. Which one will it be? The Adventures of Flotter, Fairhaven, Dixon Hill, or Vulcan Loveslave?
Fairhaven.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation, Vean. Congratulations.
Well, we all knew I would.
A woman of great modesty, I see. Mm-hmm. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Vean is awarded the title of Lecturer on Interspecies Veterinary Medicine at the Science Institute on Heckers 2.
So there you go.
Well, as a former zookeeper, that is completely appropriate.
So, Vean, why don't you tell people where they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you, and where they can keep up the conversation?
Well, for as long as Twitter hasn't crashed and burned, I'm there at lady_Vean, Vean, and that is where I'm probably most active these days in fandom spaces. The other place I'm pretty active is on Tumblr, but be prepared if you come there. That's a whole different ballgame. That's where all the crazy is, but crazy in a fun way. And lots of fun headcanons over there. So if you're not on Tumblr, go check out the community over there because it skews a little younger, I think, but those Gen Zs are pretty funny. And I'm Lady Vean there as well.
I'll put up links to all of that on the show notes page up at TrekProfiles.com. Vean, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you for having me on. It was great.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your jaunty and joyful notes of praise, your fiery flames of anger, or paintings of yourself as a Star Trek The Animated Series character to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be locked into a cell with Moopsie. Moopsie! This time, I leave you with a quote from the EMH, who said in the episode A Latent Image, quote, "The primordial atom burst, sending out its radiation, setting everything in motion. One particle collides with another, gases expand, planets contract, and before you know it, we've got starships and holodecks and chicken soup. In fact, you can't help but have starships and holodecks and chicken soup because it was all determined 20 billion years ago." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Oh boy. A couple of those, you should know, were actually submitted by listeners. So I run a contest. Yeah. So sometimes listeners send me Kobayashi Maru questions, and I ask, if people want to send in some. So a couple of those were fan-written questions. So those are pretty good.
Fairhaven is great. That is the hill I will die on.
So I was like, oh God, I feel like, I got to be honest, I feel like Vulcan Loveslave is going to win in the online poll because people are spicy. So, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right. Boom diggity, we're done. Was that okay for you?
Yeah, it was good. I'm sorry. I have chronic pain and my voice pain is pretty bad today. So if I was giving short answers, that's why.
Oh, okay. Well, what I'm more concerned about is the audio. So I got to see how this actually is going to turn out once I download everything, because it's not the best. I can tell that during the recording. So I don't know what that's due to. It might be due to the room you're in, or the microphone, or God knows what. So we'll see how all that looks. But hey, I hope you're feeling better. Yeah.
No, I'm good. I'm gonna get. Hopefully, I'll take Sammy. I am out for a walk before work and. It's good. No, I'm good.
What kind of dog?
Oh, Sam, he's a mongrel. He's just a little 10-pound nothing from the pound.